Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're putting on our detective hats, grabbing our magnifying glasses, I guess, and exploring how to really lock down a business network.
hmm
Think of it like building a kind of digital fortress, maybe. But, instead of moats and drawbridges, we're talking about some clever, techie tricks to keep the cyber nasties out.
Exactly. Yeah, and we've taken a good look at the resources you shared, kind of like studying the architectural plans for your specific fortress, as you put it.
Okay.
Our mission now is, well, to pull out the most crucial strategies for making it as secure as possible. We're really aiming for a practical understanding here, the what works and why, without getting totally tangled up in overly complicated tech speak.
Right. Keep it understandable. Okay, so where do we even start building this impenetrable fortress? One term that definitely popped up was segmentation. Sounds a bit like
hmm
just dividing things up.
You've basically nailed the core idea right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Think of segmentation as dividing your network into a series of separate, isolated zones, like having different wings or maybe self-contained apartments within your digital building.
Okay.
The big idea, really, is that if some sneaky intruder manages to get into one area, their ability to move around and cause widespread damage is seriously limited. They can't just wander through the entire system.
Containment. So how do we actually create these digital apartments? Are we talking like physically unplugging things and having completely separate sets of wires?
Well, that's one way. It's actually the most robust way in some cases. Physical segmentation, yeah, it involves using actual separate hardware routers, switches, firewalls to create completely distinct networks.
Right.
Imagine, like, building entirely separate buildings for different departments, each with its own dedicated security guards right at the entrance. This is particularly useful for large organizations, with very different security needs for different parts of the business. And it's kind of the gold standard for isolating really, really sensitive information.
Got it. So building actual separate buildings, digitally speaking. But what if you don't need quite that level of complete separation? Maybe that's overkill for some.
Exactly. And that's where the more flexible options come in, like virtual local area networks, or VLANs, as you'll hear them called.
VLANs, okay.
Think of these as creating logical separations, but within the same physical hardware. It's kind of like having different sections within one big office building, maybe separated by, I don't know, invisible walls that only certain people can pass through.
Huh. Invisible walls.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. VLANs are great for grouping devices based on their function or maybe the team that uses them. So the marketing team's computers could be on one VLAN, finance teams on another, but they're all using the same physical network gear. It helps keep traffic organized and can even improve network efficiency too.
Okay, invisible walls within the same building. Can
Wow.
picture that. Then there's subnetting. That one sounds a bit more like getting into the real nitty-gritty of network addresses.
You're right. It is a little deeper under the hood, but the fundamental principle is still about division. Subnetting takes your overall network and basically breaks it down into smaller subnetworks.
Okay.
Think of it like having a main street address and then using house numbers to differentiate the individual houses on that street.
Hmm.
This is done using something called a subnet mask. It acts like a digital key, essentially, to identify which part of an IP address refers to the main network and which part refers to the specific subnetwork or subnet. It just makes managing the network and applying security policies more targeted because you can group devices with similar needs much more easily. Plus, it's often a more efficient way to use your IP addresses.
Okay, so we've got physically separate networks, logical groups within the same equipment, and then dividing the main network into smaller address ranges. What about this microsegmentation I saw mentioned? That sounds like going down to an incredibly tiny level.
You've hit it exactly. Microsegmentation takes this idea of isolation and applies it down to individual workloads, applications, or sometimes even specific devices.
Wow.
Think of it as having individual safety deposit boxes for every single important document in your fortress, rather than just locking them all up in one big vault. This is especially critical in modern environments like cloud computing and data centers, where you've got lots of different services constantly talking to each other. It gives you extremely precise control over who can communicate with whom, and it's incredibly effective at stopping attackers from moving laterally sideways across your systems once they've managed to get that initial foothold.
Individual safety deposit boxes for everything.
Wow, that sounds super secure, but maybe also like a lot to manage.
It definitely can add complexity, especially to the initial setup, I won't lie. But the enhanced security you get, particularly in today's really interconnected environments, often makes it well worth the effort. So, okay, why bother with all this network chopping and slicing in the first place? What are the big wins?
Well, based on what you said, it sounds like it makes it much, much harder for the bad guys to get to the really valuable information, right? Containment, absolutely. Enhanced security is, without doubt, the primary benefit. If an attacker manages to breach one segment, the segmentation itself acts as a barrier. It prevents them from easily reaching critical data or other sensitive areas. Remember our virus analogy earlier?
Yeah.
If your network isn't segmented and, a piece of malware gets in, it can spread incredibly rapidly. But with segmentation, that infection can hopefully be contained to just a small area, like quarantining a sick person to prevent a wider outbreak.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah, containment is key in the real world and the digital world too, I guess. What other advantages does segmentation offer?
Well, it enables much more effective access control.
Yeah.
When your network is divided into these segments, you can implement very specific rules about who and what can access resources within each segment. So, for example, you can easily restrict access to the financial data segment so only the accounting department can get in. It also plays a really vital role in meeting compliance requirements. Many regulations, things like PCI DSS for handling credit card info or HIPAA for healthcare data, they actually mandate segmentation of the systems that process and store this kind of sensitive data.
Ah, okay. So it's not just about better security, it's also about, like, ticking the boxes for regulatory compliance sometimes.
Precisely. And on top of that, segmentation can actually boost network performance. It does this by reducing congestion within the segments. It's like having smaller, less crowded roads for data to travel on rather than one giant, constantly jammed superhighway.
Mhm.
And crucially, it lets you apply more stringent, tougher security measures to your most vital systems, giving them an extra layer of protection.
Like putting extra thick walls and maybe laser grids around the room with all the company's secrets.
Exactly like that. And finally, just thinking about growth. As your organization grows and changes, segmentation provides scalability and agility. You can adapt your network to new needs without completely sacrificing your overall security posture.
Okay, right. So segmentation is like creating these internal compartments, each with its own security rules. Now, how do we decide who gets the keys to which compartments?
That leads us perfectly into access control. This is basically the whole process of determining who or even what, like a system, is allowed to access specific data, applications, network resources, or cloud services. And it's all based on a defined set of policies. It's really about managing the permissions and privileges within your digital fortress.
So if segmentation is about creating the rooms, access control is about deciding who has the right key card to actually get into each room.
That's a perfect analogy, yeah. And a fundamental tool for enforcing this access control is something called an access control list, or ACL.
ACO, okay.
Think of it as like a literal guest list held by a very, very strict doorman at the entrance to a particular network segment or maybe a specific resource, like a server. Routers and firewalls use these lists, which contain a set of rules, basically, to decide whether to allow or deny network traffic trying to get through.
So the ACL is the doorman with the list.
Gotcha. Are there different kinds of lists for different situations, then?
There are, yes. One main type deals specifically with files and folders. These ACLs control who can access specific data files and what actions they're allowed to perform on them. Like, can they just read it? Can they edit it? Can they delete it?
Right.
So let's say we have a sales team, maybe working on different types of data. Bill might need read-only access to all the final sales reports just to see the overall performance. But Ben, who actually compiles the reports, well, he needs read and write access so he can update them. But maybe neither of them should have any access to the marketing team's confidential campaign plans stored elsewhere. That's file and folder ACLs in action.
Okay, so it's really about tailoring access based on the type of data and, importantly, the person's specific role and what they need to do.
Precisely. And this leads us straight to a really important security principle: least privilege.
Least privilege. Okay. Yeah, it's the idea that any user or even a system or application should only be granted the absolute minimum level of access necessary to perform the required tasks and nothing more. So in our example, Ben needs to write sales data, so he gets that permission. Bill only needs to view it, so he only gets read access. This really minimizes the potential for accidental damage or, malicious misuse of data if an account gets compromised.
Least privilege, only giving out the necessary digital keys. Makes total sense.
Oh.
What was the other type of ACL you mentioned?
Ah, yes, that's network ACLs. These are configured on things like firewalls and routers, and their job is to control traffic entering and leaving entire network segments.
Okay.
When you set up a new firewall, for instance, it typically has a default policy of deny all.
Everything blocked?
Everything blocked initially, yes. It means it blocks all network traffic unless you explicitly create allow rules to permit certain types of communication that you actually need. It's kind of like starting with all the doors and windows locked tight and then only deliberately unlocking the specific ones you need open for business.
Right. Starts completely locked down, and you have to intentionally punch holes, basically, for the pathways you need.
Exactly. Now, alongside ACLs, we also have permissions. Permissions define the specific actions that a user or system can take on a resource once they've been granted access by the ACL.
Okay.
So, can they just open a file? Can they modify it? Can they run an application program? Can they delete something? These permissions are granted based on roles and responsibilities, again, tying back to least privilege, to prevent unauthorized actions within the system, even if someone has access to the system.
Okay, got it. So ACLs are the gatekeepers deciding who gets in the door, and permissions are the rules about what they can actually do once they're inside. Right. What's our next layer of defense in this fortress?
Okay, next up, let's talk about application allow lists. These are sometimes called whitelists. The core idea here is pretty straightforward. You create a list of approved applications that are explicitly allowed to run on your systems, and anything that's not on that list is automatically blocked from running, period.
So it's like having a strict VIP list for software. If your app isn't on the list, it just doesn't get past the velvet rope. No entry.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. Think about an employee, let's call him Bob again. Bob might inadvertently download and try to install a game, or maybe something worse, like a piece of malware disguised as a legitimate program he found online.
Yeah, happens all the time.
Right. With an application allow list in place, only the pre-approved vetted software would be allowed to execute. So Bob's questionable download would be stopped dead in its tracks before it could even run and potentially cause harm.
That sounds like a really, really effective way to prevent unauthorized software from causing trouble. But what if there's a specific application we know is bad or risky? Do we also have a sort of bad apps list?
We do indeed. That's generally called an application block list, or sometimes a deny list or blacklist.
Yeah.
This is where you specifically identify applications that you actively want to prevent from running on your network.
Good.
Tools like Microsoft's App Blocker, for example, allow administrators to create and manage these block lists effectively.
So the allow list is the only these are good list, and the blacklist is the definite naughty list. When would you use one versus the other? Is one better?
Well, generally speaking, an allow list provides a stronger security posture overall because it operates on that default deny principle we talked about with firewalls. Only explicitly trusted applications are permitted, full stop.
Right.
A block list, on the other hand, it tries to identify and prevent known malicious or maybe just unwanted applications. The main challenge with block lists is that new threats and unwanted software emerge constantly, so you're always playing catch-up trying to keep the list updated.
Ah, yeah, that makes sense.
However, block lists can be useful for quickly addressing known problematic applications, maybe something that suddenly becomes vulnerable, or perhaps for enforcing organizational policies against non-business related software, like games or file sharing apps. So think of the block list as your specific do not run list apps you've actively identified as undesirable in your environment.
Okay, so allow listing for maybe maximum security by default, and block listing for targeting known problem apps and enforcing certain company rules. Got it. What's next in our security arsenal?
That would probably be isolation. This involves creating secure, kind of self-contained environments specifically for your most critical system or your most sensitive data. The main goal here is to limit the potential impact if a security breach does occur somewhere else.
So the idea is, even if an attacker manages to somehow slip through some of our outer defenses, the really valuable stuff, the crown jewels, is still tucked away in its own protected bubble.
Precisely. That's the concept. Imagine it like this. Even if someone gets past the main outer walls of your fortress, your most prized possessions are locked away in a series of inner sanctums deep inside that are much harder to reach.
Right.
Isolation can also be used reactively to contain a security incident. It helps prevent malware from spreading from an infected system to the rest of the network.
Like putting a sort of digital quarantine area around any potential outbreak before it spreads further?
Right.
Makes sense. Okay, now how do we keep all our systems in good fighting shape and, prevent vulnerabilities from appearing in the first place?
That's where patching comes in. Critically important. The primary purpose of patching is simply to update your operating systems, your applications, and even device firmware with the latest security fixes and updates released by the vendors.
Hmm.
Think of it as regularly inspecting and repairing any cracks or weaknesses that might have appeared in the walls of your fortress over time.
So ignoring all those software update reminders that pop up
Yeah.
constantly is actually a really bad idea from a security perspective.
Absolutely. A terrible idea. Keeping your software up to date is probably one of the most fundamental security practices there is. Unpatched vulnerabilities are like leaving doors wide open for attackers to just walk through. It's absolutely crucial to apply patches promptly, as soon as it's practical, to minimize your risk exposure.
Okay, patching is mandatory, non-negotiable.
Got it.
What about protecting the actual confidentiality of our information, making sure people can't read it, even if they get it?
That's where encryption comes into play. Encryption is the process of transforming data plain text into an unreadable format, which we call ciphertext. This ensures that even if unauthorized individuals somehow gain access to the data, they won't be able to understand it or make any sense of it without the decryption key.
So it's basically like scrambling the data so intensely that only those with the special secret decoder ring can actually read it.
Exactly. That's a great analogy. Think of it as putting your sensitive information inside an invisible suit of armor, both when it's being transmitted across networks data in transit and when it's just stored on your system's data at rest.
All right, both states.
Yep. Whether it's customer data, financial records, confidential internal communications, whatever encryption helps maintain its confidentiality and also its integrity, meaning it hasn't been tampered with.
Invisible armor for our data.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay, so we're building walls with segmentation, controlling access with ACLs and permissions, blocking bad apps, isolating critical systems, patching vulnerabilities constantly, and encrypting our sensitive data. Q. How do we keep an eye on everything that's happening across this whole complex setup?
That's where monitoring comes in. Essential. The purpose of monitoring is to continuously observe your network and system activity, looking for any unusual patterns or suspicious behavior. It's like having security cameras and guards constantly watching over every part of your digital fortress 24/7.
So if something looks out of place, like someone trying a locked door too many times, an alarm should ideally go off somewhere.
Precisely. Effective monitoring helps you detect potential threats early on, hopefully before major damage is done, and allows your security team, your Security Operations Center, or SOC, to respond quickly and appropriately. Now, there are two key types of systems that play a vital role in modern security monitoring: SIEM and SOAR.
SIEM and SOAR, they sound like some kind of dynamic duo. What do they actually do?
They can be. Well, SIEM stands for Security Information and Event Management. Think of it as a centralized intelligence hub. It collects and analyzes security logs and event data from all your different systems and devices, servers, firewalls, network equipment, workstations, even applications.
Oh, everything feeds into it.
Pretty much, it correlates this huge amount of information in real time to identify potential security threats, patterns, anomalies, and then it generates alerts for your security team to investigate. So, while SIEM gives you incredible visibility into what's happening, it often still requires human analysts to interpret the alerts and decide what action to take.
Okay, so SIEM is like the central nervous system, gathering information from all over the digital body and flagging potential problems. What about SOAR then? What does it add?
Right. SOAR stands for Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. This really takes security operations a significant step further. So systems use automation, often combined with artificial intelligence and machine learning, to not only help detect threats, but also to orchestrate and automate the responses to them.
Automate the response.
How? They often use predefined workflows called playbooks. These playbooks outline the steps to take for common security incidents, and the SOAR tool can execute many of these steps automatically. This is a crucial evolution because it allows security teams to move from being purely reactive analysts to having proactive response capabilities, especially given the sheer volume and increasing sophistication of attacks today.
So wait, SIEM flags a potential issue, and SOAR can then automatically kick off a process to investigate further, maybe quarantine a machine or block an IP address based on a playbook.
Exactly. SOAR can automate many of the routine, time-consuming tasks involved in the initial stages of incident response, like isolating potentially infected machines, blocking known malicious IP addresses at the firewall, or maybe disabling a compromised user account. This frees up your highly skilled security analysts to focus their time and energy on the more complex, novel threats that require human expertise.
Wow, that sounds incredibly efficient. It must help teams react much, much faster. Okay, great. We've talked about all these amazing layers of technological defense. How do we make sure we're not undermining it all by giving people way more access than they actually need to do their jobs?
That brings us right back around to that principle we mentioned earlier, least privilege. Its core purpose is simply to ensure that users, and again, systems or applications too, are granted only the absolute minimum level of permissions required to perform their necessary functions and absolutely no more.
So if someone really only needs to view a file, we absolutely do not give them the ability to edit or delete it, just in case.
Exactly right. This significantly reduces the potential impact of both accidental errors, someone deleting the wrong thing, and intentional misuse of resources. Critically, if an attacker does manage to compromise a user account, but that account has very limited privileges, the amount of damage they can cause is also inherently limited. It's just a fundamental principle for minimizing overall risk.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Only grant the necessary digital powers. Limit the blast radius, so to speak. What about making sure all our systems are configured securely from the get-go and actually stay that way over time?
That's the whole role of configuration enforcement. This involves, first, establishing strict security standards for how all your systems and applications should be configured, and then, crucially, maintaining and enforcing those standards consistently across the board.
So setting a kind of security baseline for how things should look, and then constantly checking to make sure everything is still in line with that baseline.
Precisely. There are several methods for achieving this. Standardization is key, often by using recognized security benchmarks like the CIS benchmarks, which provide really well-defined best practices for securing various operating systems and applications.
Okay.
Following these benchmarks not only simplifies management by having a consistent target, but it also proactively helps in vulnerability mitigation by ensuring systems are configured by default to resist many known weaknesses. Furthermore, like segmentation, adhering to secure configurations is often essential for meeting various regulatory compliance requirements. And automation is absolutely key here too. Using tools that allow for continuous monitoring and automatic correction, or at least alerting, of any deviations from your established secure configurations is vital for making this manageable at scale.
So it's about setting the security rules clearly and then having automated systems where possible to make sure everyone and everything is playing by them.
Right.
What happens when we have old computers or maybe outdated software that we genuinely no longer need? We can't just leave it sitting around, right?
No. Definitely not. That's where decommissioning comes in. This is the formal process of securely retiring outdated or no longer needed hardware and software assets. It's actually a surprisingly critical security step, especially for any devices that may have stored sensitive company or customer data at some point.
So we definitely can't just wipe a hard drive quickly and toss it in the e-waste recycling bin.
Absolutely not. That's asking for trouble. The first crucial step is proper documentation, updating your asset inventory to show the device is retired, and keeping a clear record of the entire decommissioning process. Dates, reasons, who was responsible, how data was handled.
Okay.
Then comes the most critical part, data sanitization. You need to ensure that all data on those devices is rendered completely irretrievable, permanently. The best method really depends on the type of media. For paper documents, believe it or not, burning is often considered the most secure, followed by pulping. Shredding, especially cross-cut shredding, is less effective, but still much better than simply throwing them in the trash.
Right. And for hard drives and stuff.
For digital media like hard drives or SSDs, physically destroying them through industrial shredding or pulverizing is the most secure option, hands down. Methods like degaussing, which uses powerful magnets, or just wiping or formatting the drive might be sufficient if you plan to reuse the drive within your own controlled environment, but they carry significantly more risk if media ever leaves your physical possession.
Gotcha. So destruction is best if it's leaving the building.
Generally, yes. Effective decommissioning is important because it reduces your overall attack surface by eliminating potential old entry points. It can lower operational costs by getting rid of unused assets, consuming power or licenses. And again, it's often a specific requirement for compliance regulations.
Okay, so it's about securely and formally saying goodbye to our old tech. Makes sense. Finally, let's talk about hardening techniques. That sounds like making our systems extra tough, extra resilient.
That's exactly right. Hardening is the process of making your systems more resistant to attacks by actively reducing their attack surface and mitigating known vulnerabilities. It's like adding extra layers of armor plating and reinforcing the weak spots on your digital fortress components.
Okay.
Techniques include things like encryption, which we've already discussed quite a bit, and also implementing robust endpoint protection on all the individual devices, laptops, desktops, servers.
Endpoint protection, is that like super-powered antivirus software that goes beyond just scanning for known viruses from a list?
Yes, it's much more than traditional antivirus. Think of it as a comprehensive security agent running on each individual device. Endpoint detection and response, or EDR, is a key solution here.
EDR, right.
EDR uses advanced techniques like behavioral analysis, artificial intelligence, machine learning to continuously monitor endpoint activity in real time. It aims to detect both known threats and unknown zero-day threats based on suspicious behavior. It also provides real-time alerts and often includes automated response capabilities, tying back to what SOAR does at a broader level.
Other endpoint tools include host-based intrusion prevention systems, or HIPS, which specifically monitor the behavior of applications and processes on a computer to prevent malicious activity from executing, and host-based firewalls, which are software firewalls running on individual devices to control network traffic coming into and going out of that specific machine. And this is particularly important for laptops that might be used outside the protected corporate network, like at home or in coffee shops.
Okay, so EDR is like having a really intelligent, proactive security guard constantly watching over every single computer and device. That sounds powerful. What are some other important hardening techniques we should think about?
Well, disabling any unnecessary network ports and protocols is absolutely crucial. These are like unused doors or windows in your fortress that an attacker might find and try to exploit.
Right, lock them down if you don't need them. Exactly. For example, older, less secure protocols like Telnet, which shockingly transmits passwords in plain text across the network, should definitely be disabled if possible. Similarly, protocols like NetBIOS and SMB, which are often used internally for file and printer sharing, need to be very carefully restricted from being exposed directly to the public internet, as they are frequent targets for attackers trying to gain initial access. Changing default passwords on all systems and devices is another absolutely fundamental step. Default passwords are often publicly known or easily guessed, and they are frequently the very first thing attackers try when probing a network.
Yeah, basic security hygiene, but so important.
Incredibly important. And finally, removing any software, services, or features that are not absolutely essential for the device's function reduces the potential attack surface, fewer things that could have a vulnerability, and it also simplifies your overall security management and patching efforts. Less stuff to worry about.
So bottom line, it's about proactively locking down anything we don't actively need, both in terms of software running and the communication pathways being open, and making absolutely sure that basic security hygiene, like using strong, unique passwords, is consistently in place everywhere.
Exactly. All these different strategies and techniques we've discussed today, they really need to work together. It's not about picking just one. They collectively create a layered, defense in-depth approach, building that robust defense needed for an organization's valuable digital assets in today's world.
Wow, okay, that's a really comprehensive overview. It definitely paints a much clearer picture for me of all the different interconnected elements involved in building and maintaining a strong digital defense posture.
It is quite a lot, and honestly, in today's constantly evolving threat landscape, understanding and proactively implementing these kinds of strategies isn't just, a good recommendation. It's rapidly becoming an absolute necessity for protecting your organization from potentially devastating attacks.
Definitely food for thought. Okay, so considering all these different layers we've discussed, from segmenting the entire network right down to hardening individual devices and disabling specific ports, what do you think is maybe the single most underestimated or perhaps overlooked aspect of enterprise security today? And why might that be the case? Is it maybe the human element, people clicking things they shouldn't, or perhaps the sheer challenge of keeping pace with rapidly changing technology, or maybe just the overwhelming complexity of modern networks?
That's a really insightful question to ponder. Yeah, definitely one that anyone serious about enterprise security should probably spend some time considering. There's likely no single right answer, but thinking about the potential weak spots is key.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking us on this deep dive into enterprise security today. It's been incredibly informative and given me a lot to think about.